Good morning. You are all very welcome to today's presentation. The topic is delegatus non potest delegare, algorithmic decision making, and the future of administrative justice. My name is Tomas McInerney. I am a first year PhD candidate on the Links doctoral programme at Queen's University, Belfast. To unpack the title of my thesis a little, I will provide you with some research context. So, an emerging area of scholarship focuses on concerns stemming from the use of algorithmic decision making, commonly referred to as ADM, in the public sector. The increased ubiquity of ADM in the public sector has amplified concerns relating to transparency, accountability, and of particular concern in this presentation, automation bias. Automation bias is a well-documented, important concern with broad social implications. As a result, it warrants a robust solution. The application of established delegation common law rules to automation bias can provide the solution. It can mitigate against the cavalier delegation of decision-making power to algorithms. Towards the end of the presentation, the delegation algorithm will provide a visual representation of my findings to demonstrate its utility in addressing contemporary concerns in algorithmic decision making. So initially, I will discuss the delegation doctrine and the common law. I will then move on to connecting the delegation doctrine with algorithmic decision making. Finally, I will apply the common law to algorithmic decision making via the delegation algorithm. So they are my 3 steps for today. The first protocol is to consider a definition of the delegation doctrine. Gordon Anthony defines it as follows: where statute gives a decision maker a discretionary power, whether of a judicial, legislative, or administrative nature, it is generally unlawful for the decision maker to delegate that power to a subordinate, unless the statute expressly provides for that delegation. This is sometimes referred to in its Latin form. However, the common law displays a clear preference to the term delegation. And from here on in, I will simply refer to it as the delegation doctrine. It is a presumption. It's not a rule. It's a strong presumption, but it can be rebutted. The taking of advice and recommendations will not offend the delegation doctrine. However, if the decision maker is dictated to, this will amount to the delegation of decision-making power. Clearly delineating between what is considered to be the taking of advice on the one hand and what amounts to dictation on the other is integral to this thesis, but this line is not always clear. We will tease this out over the course of this presentation. If the decision-making power has been delegated, the next step would be to consider whether that delegation is lawful. But why the delegation doctrine? Well, it has a range of important functions. At its broadest level, it has an important function in democracy and the rule of law. But for the purposes of today's presentation, we are focusing on its utility as an accountability mechanism. Applying one's mind. The common law states that a decision maker must address its mind to the issue at hand. In this case, lavender, the decision maker had merely adopted the position of another. They didn't address their mind to the issue at hand or consider any other possible solutions. The nominated decision maker had failed to give genuine consideration to the matter before him or to any other relevant documents. Consequently, the decision maker had rubber stamped the decision made by another body. The Court of Appeal expanded on the scope of addressing one's mind in Audit Commission v. Ealing. The Audit Commission, was the nominated decision maker, adopted a decision by a subordinate body called the CSCI that automatically downgraded a local authority called Ealing. On appeal, the court distinguished this case from Lavender, stating, the decision is not based on the subjective judgment of the CSCI, but is arrived at by the application of a set of transparent and objective rules. There is no discretion involved in translating those judgments into a star rating. In Lavender, it was the case that the decision maker had been dictated to by another body. That was not the case in Audit Commission. Therefore, no delegation of power had occurred. At this stage, I want to introduce a definition of algorithmic decision making. So when I refer to algorithmic decision making, I'm talking about the use of algorithms as an aid or substitute to human analysis to make or inform actions or decisions. ADM can be fully automated where no human input is required, or it can be mixed where algorithms inform human decision making. In the context of the delegation doctrine, the focus is on mixed methods decision making, as you can see with the diagram on the right-hand side. How can the delegation doctrine apply to algorithmic decision making? To demonstrate a potential overlap, let's consider two definitions pertaining to, on the one hand, rubber stamping and automation bias. Cobb defines automation bias as follows. People tend to trust decisions made by machines, are more likely to defer to those machines, and are less likely to exercise meaningful review of those decisions than if the decision was made by a human. Compared with rubber stamping, the nominated decision maker must address its mind to the issue at hand. And I think placing these two definitions side by side reveals a clear similarity. To demonstrate this more fully, the Venn diagram illustrates areas of overlap between rubber stamping and automation bias. A comparison of some of the key terms relating to rubber stamping and automation bias will further demonstrate these similarities. So if we look at genuine consideration on the left-hand side and compare that with a reduction in human capacity on the right-hand side, I think you can see there is a similarity there, as with the other terms I have included in the diagram. Establishing a connection between these two is very important. And I've left an area in the middle blank. I think there is scope here for a definition that subsumes both of these concepts. Moving on to the delegation algorithm. The delegation algorithm provides an algorithmic representation of the common law. It can be used to ensure a decision maker has sufficiently considered the output of an ADM system. I have elicited the main principles of the rubber stamping common law and put them into an algorithmic format. So let's start with the origins of the case law. In Lavender, as we've discussed, the question was, had the decision maker addressed its mind to the issue at hand? If the answer to that was yes, the decision maker has retained sufficient oversight in the decision-making process, and no issue of unlawful delegation has arisen. If the answer was no, you would then move to the decision by the Court of Appeal in Audit Commission. Has the decision maker relied on a set of transparent or objective rules to reach its judgment? If the answer is no, the decision maker may be guilty of rubber stamping. But if the answer is yes, we can move on to step one of the delegation algorithm. Has the delegatee refrained from exercising any individualized discretion? If the answer is no, the decision maker may be guilty of rubber stamping. But if the answer is yes, step 2. Is it accepted that the decision maker can rely on these scores? And is the decision reached in an entirely predictable way? If the answer is no, the decision maker may be guilty of rubber stamping. But if the answer is yes, we move on to step 3. Has the decision maker adopted the pre-known principles of the transparent and objective test? If the answer is no, they may be guilty of rubber stamping. If the answer is yes, we move on to step 4. Does the matter involve technical expertise? If it does not, they may be guilty of rubber stamping. But if it does, we move on to the 5th and final factor to be considered. Is it the case that the affected body or individual has not suffered any real prejudice as a result of the decision? If the answer is no, again, they may be guilty of rubber stamping that decision. If the answer is yes, the decision maker has retained sufficient oversight and no delegation arises. These 5 steps have been extracted from the common law based on my interpretation of their relevance in that case. I understand that this constrains the common law to the parameters of a yes or no framework. And I think there are other aspects that can be drawn in to enhance its fluidity and provide a more accurate representation of the common law. But generally, I think this provides a really good test. And of course, this can also be used to determine whether a human or a subordinate or another nominated decision maker has addressed their mind to the issue at hand as well. It's not limited to algorithmic decision making. So the delegation algorithm, I think the hope is that it can mitigate against the cavalier delegation of decision-making power to an ADM system. It provides comprehensive guidance to a decision maker or a court in determining whether or not decision-making power has been delegated. And why is it important? Well, as we discussed earlier, delegation doctrine has a number of important functions, from democracy to the rule of law to accountability. The next stage would be to consider whether that power has been lawfully delegated. So after we have established, has delegation occurred, the next step is to consider, is that delegation lawful? So relating it back to ADM, if delegation to an algorithm was expressly provided by statute, then there would be no issue. It becomes a little more complicated where the implied delegation doctrine is involved, as courts have found that a power to delegate can be inferred. The Coltana exception is an exception that applies to decisions that are made by ministers and ministerial departments. I have also conducted some research in this area, and I have generated another algorithmic representation of the doctrine of implied delegation, which is sort of tricky territory to navigate. So to conclude, the delegation algorithm illustrates the utility of the common law in addressing contemporary issues in algorithmic decision making. What's good about it is it doesn't stifle innovation. It doesn't prevent the use of ADM tools, but it provides a good threshold to maintain good decision-making standards. More precise methods may be needed in the future, but it is reassuring to know that now the common law can provide this protection. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions.